Most of us have heard about the terrible human experiments the Nazis carried out on people by Dr. Mengele. But the Nazis were not alone in conducting brutal human experiments. One of the lesser-known atrocities of the 20th century was committed by Unit 731 of the Imperial Army of Japan. Some of the details of this unit's activities are still undisclosed. For 40 years, the horrific activities of Unit 731 remained one of the most closely guarded secrets of World War II. Only in 1984 did Japan acknowledge what it had long denied. The gruesome human experiments conducted by the unit in preparation for bacteriological warfare. Intentionally infected with plague, anthrax, cholera, and other pathogens, some 3,000 enemy soldiers and civilians were used as guinea pigs. Some of the most gruesome experiments included vivisection without anesthesia, performing in vivo surgeries, and pressure chambers to see how much a person could withstand before their eyes popped out. Unit 731 was established in 1938 in Japanese-occupied China to develop biological weapons. It also operated a secret research and experimental school in Shinjuku, in central Tokyo. Its head was Lieutenant Shiro Ishii. The unit was supported by Japanese universities and medical schools, which supplied doctors and research personnel. The picture of its activities now revealing itself as horrifying. According to reports never officially recognized by Japanese authorities, the unit used thousands of Chinese and other Asian civilians and wartime prisoners as guinea pigs to breed and develop murderous diseases. Many of the prisoners killed in the name of research were used in gruesome vivisection and other medical experiments, including barbaric experiments to determine the effects of frostbite on the human body. For the relief of conscience, the prisoners were not called people or patients, but maruta, or wooden logs. Before the surrender of Japan, the site of the experiments was completely destroyed so that no evidence remained. The remaining 400 prisoners were then shot, and the unit personnel had to be sworn to secrecy. The mice held in the laboratory were released, which could have cost the lives of 30,000 people because the mice were infected with bubonic plague and were spreading the disease. Few of those involved in Unit 731 admitted their guilt. Some caught in China at the end of the war were arrested and detained, but few were prosecuted for war crimes. In Japan, none were prosecuted. Under a secret deal, the post-war American administration granted them immunity from prosecution in exchange for details of their experiments. Some of the worst offenders, including Hisato Yoshimura, who directed the frostbite experiments, later held key medical and other positions in the public and private sectors. Experiments. Detachment 731 and Detachment 100 were two biological warfare research centers established in defiance of the 1925 Geneva Protocol banning biological and chemical warfare. Under the leadership of Lieutenant General Ishii Shiro, 3,000 Japanese researchers working at Unit 731 headquarters in Harbin infected living people with diseases such as plague and anthrax and then killed them without anesthesia to see how these diseases affected human organs. Because of the secret nature of the unit, there is no complete list of the experiments that Unit 731 conducted. Testimonies from participants shed some light on parts of the experiments. An anonymous medical assistant described his first vivisection in a 1995 New York Times interview. The guy knew it was over for him, so he didn't resist when he was brought into the room and tied up. But when I picked up the scalpel, he started screaming. I cut him from chest to stomach, and he screamed terribly, his face contorted in agony. He was making unimaginable sounds, he was screaming so terribly. But then, finally, he stopped. It was a routine job for surgeons because they had done it many times before, but it made a big impression on me because it was my first time. But this unit was notorious, not only for its vivisections. Some prisoners sent to Unit 731 were taken outside and tied to stakes. The Japanese then tested new biological weapons on them, such as plague crops or bombs stuffed with plague-infected fleas. In other research, Japanese scientists tortured people who were called logs. People were locked in pressure chambers to test how much their bodies could withstand before their eyes popped out. Some test subjects were taken outside during the harsh winter until their limbs froze, so doctors could test how best to treat frostbite. Since the Japanese army used poison gas during the war, one of the tasks of Unit 731 was to develop a stronger poison gas, so the prisoners were exposed to poisoning. In 1984, a graduate student at Keio Medical University in Tokyo found records of human experimentation in a bookstore. The pages described the effects of huge doses of tetanus vaccine. There were tables describing the length of time it took the victims to die and recording the muscle spasms in their bodies. At least 3,000 people, not only Chinese, but also Russians, Mongols, and Koreans, died as a result of the experiments conducted in Unit 731 between 1939 and 1945. Not a single prisoner walked out of the gates of the unit alive. During the war, the Japanese Imperial Army used biological weapons developed and manufactured in the Unit 731 laboratory in Harbin, China, killing or wounding some 300,000 people. Consequences. For its part, the Japanese government did not recognize the existence of Unit 731 until recently. When it became apparent that Japan would be defeated, Japanese soldiers destroyed Unit 731's headquarters. The Chinese later rebuilt some of the main buildings and in 1982 began to establish a museum. Several years ago, 180 Chinese victims and victims' families sued the Japanese government, demanding an apology, compensation, and full disclosure of Unit 731's activities. The Tokyo High Court recognized the existence of Unit 731 but upheld the decision of the lower court, which denied the plaintiffs compensation. None of the Japanese scientists who worked for Unit 731 were ever punished. In 1946, U.S. General Douglas MacArthur granted all Japanese scientists immunity from prosecution for war crimes in exchange for bacteriological warfare data collected from the Harbin experiments. As explained in an internal memorandum from the War Department dated June 23, 1947, since it is believed that the USSR possesses only a small part of the technical information, and since any action involving war crimes would fully disclose this data to all countries, it is believed that such publicity should be avoided in the interests of U.S. defense and security. It is also believed that prosecuting General Ishii and his associates for war crimes would stop the flow of additional technical and scientific information. General Ishii lived on the outskirts of Tokyo until his death in 1959. Other alumni of Unit 731 include a former governor of Tokyo, former president of the Japan Medical Association, former director of the Preventive Health Research Center at the Ministry of Health, former chairman and president of Green Cross Corporation, and former heads of several Japanese medical schools. The man in charge of vivisection, Yoshisuke Murata, became director of the respected Kyoto University School of Medicine and then director of the Faculty of Medicine at Kinki University. In 1981, a fictionalized work by journalist Seiichi Morimura titled Voracious Devils was published, based in part on interviews with Japanese survivors who had worked in the laboratory. It was filled with stories of how the victims were subjected to freezing, high pressure, and vivisection. The current negative attitude toward Japan by China and South Korea is mainly due to the fact that Japan has not punished most of its war criminals. Many of them continued to live and work in the land of the rising sun after World War II, as well as holding responsible positions. Even those who carried out biological experiments on humans in the infamous Special Unit 731. This is not much different from the experiments of Dr. Joseph Mengele. The cruelty and cynicism of such experiments is incomprehensible to the modern human mind, but they were quite organic to the Japanese of the time. After all, the victory of the emperor was at stake then, and he was sure that only science could give this victory. Harbin Museum. On the southern outskirts of Harbin, the capital of northeastern China's Heilongjiang province, a white two-story building with a red tile roof stands next to Harbin Secondary School No. 25. The building was originally part of a complex of 150 buildings covering 6 square kilometers, built by the Japanese in the 1930s. Today, inside the building is the Detachment 731 Museum, featuring black and white photographs and relics from that period donated by locals to remind people of the horrific experiments conducted here during World War II, when it was the world's largest biological warfare research center. Today, as the world remembers the surrender of Japan that ended World War II 60 years ago, the Communist Party of China will not allow its people to forget the atrocities Japanese soldiers and scientists committed in China during the war. Visit the Unit 731 Museum. The museum leaves a mark on the memory of visitors, although the most horrific photographs are not on display here. There are guided tours and an audio guide in English. If you were interested, thank the author by putting a like. And also do not forget to subscribe so as not to miss the outputs of even more interesting videos of my channel. Turn on notifications by clicking on the bell and share this video with your friends. What else interesting can you add to this video? Write in the comments, it will be interesting to read.